It's video time. It's the Assassination of Julius Caesar. Let's get into it.
Caesar's reforms had left a huge impact on the social and political life of Rome, and although his popularity with the masses was immense, there were men at the top of the Roman political ladder who were plotting against him. In this episode, we shall look at the motivations of these conspirators, which led to the assassination of Caesar on the Ides of March 44 BC. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, Gaius Julius Caesar was a big fan of trimming, plucking and shaving his body hair, and the sponsor of this video, Manscaped, would love to help you be like Caesar. Summer is here, but are you ready to unveil your beach body? Our friends at Manscaped just launched their 4th generation performance package, which Caesar's
I do have to give him credit for that build up to the ad that was created.
Reforms had already led some to see him as a tyrant, and this was compounded by rumors that Caesar planned to overthrow the Republic and become something the Romans hated most, a king of Rome. These rumors were not unfounded. As dictator, Caesar was proclaimed father of the country. Sacrifices and games were given in his honor, and his statue was included alongside those of the gods in the procession before the games. He was also given a special chair in the Senate, made of ivory and gold, in effect a throne.
Wow.
Furthermore, Cleopatra...
He was given that throne. He didn't have it made for him. And even if, I understand you don't want a king, but you gave him that power. So if you don't like what he could become, then you shouldn't have given him the power to begin with. Not saying that he should have elevated himself up, but he didn't have that chair made for himself. It's a tricky situation. Let's see what they say about Cleopatra.
Had recently arrived in Rome, igniting rumors that Caesar wanted to install a Hellenistic-style monarchy, with himself as king and Cleopatra as queen.
Why'd she show up? Was she just visiting? Or was she... I don't know much about Cleopatra. Was she ousted from Egypt? Ousted? Is that the word? Kicked out? Exiled? Exiled. Ooh, I like that one.
Caesar took to wearing triumphal garb, a laurel crown of victory and red boots, and on one occasion didn't stand to greet the senators. The Roman kings of the past had worn red shoes, and they combined with the crown, throne and perceived disrespect to the Senate to make the rumors look true.
Okay.
A small minority liked the idea. They adorned a statue of Caesar with a crown, and even once hailed him as a king, a plebeian tribute.
Are there any statues of Caesar around now? There wouldn't be a statue from 2,000 years ago, though. Would there be? No. No, there wouldn't be.
Marullus had them imprisoned for that, and in response, Caesar accused Marullus of having orchestrated the events in order to damage his political position, and had the tribune imprisoned. Marullus's office was sacrosanct, so this was seen as proof of Caesar's tyrannical ways and disregard for the Republic. For some, it was also proof that Caesar did in fact want the title of king.
I'm sure he did. But why don't they just make everything even and just throw the statue in jail? That way Caesar is serving time.
And that he punished Marullus because the tribune had been imprisoning Caesar's supporters. According to Appian, on one occasion, Caesar was watching a ceremony for the Lupercal Games, which included Antony, as consul for that year, and the other priests running naked and anointing people. At one point, Antony approached Caesar with a crown. Some in the crowd groaned at this, others applauded, but Caesar refused the crown, pleasing the majority of people. Again Antony tried to crown Caesar, and again he refused, drawing huge applause from the crowd. This has often been interpreted as a staged affair to see how the people would react, with Caesar hoping that he would be welcomed as king. Combined with Caesar's other actions, some were convinced that Caesar would use his powers as dictator to become a monarch. In the ancient sources, it is these reasons that are given for why the conspirators decided to plot against Caesar and later dubbed themselves liberators. However, there is also evidence to counter these claims. Caesar forbade any from calling him king, saying that he was not king but Caesar, and Dio points out that he did not ask for any honours. Some of them were enacted by his past enemies, like Cicero, eager to curry his favour, while many of his allies likely thought that he really did deserve the honours bestowed on him. It was in Caesar's interest to therefore try to appease both sides, accepting some honours while denying the more egregious ones.
He should have never invited the whole controversy by wearing the red boots and that red, I'll say sash, whatever it was. If he wanted to be the king, you got to keep that shit quiet, because they don't want a king. He should have never wore that stuff. In a way that put a bullseye on him, especially to the enemies. Yeah, I can kind of see the downfall here. Yeah.
Caesar's punishment of Marullus was arguably overzealous, but it may have been done to try and maintain neutrality with the party that apparently did want him as king. According to Dio, Caesar's wearing of a triumphal crown was to try and hide his baldness. Similarly, Plutarch claims that Caesar not standing to meet the Senate was due to Caesar's illness, which often made him dizzy and faint if he stood up quickly after being sat for too long.
What illness did he have? And why? How would a crown, the little thing around here, how would it cover baldness on the back of your head? Okay.
Lastly, there is the anecdote of Antony crowning Caesar. When one considers the image of a naked, oiled Antony offering the crown to Caesar, it's harder to see it as a cunning political ploy. In fact, it's arguably much closer to a joke in bad taste, or a charade to amuse the masses. Finally, one must also consider the question of why Caesar would have wanted to be king. As Plutarch and Dio both point out, he effectively had all the power of a king, so why also have a title that carried such heavy political baggage in Rome? It's hard to think that Caesar would not have known how foolhardy such an idea was. Some modern historians have suggested that the conspirators' idea that they were saving the Republic was mere propaganda, and that many were motivated by more personal factors. In total, there were six.
I would say they were motivated by the personal factor of they feared him. They feared the power that he had, that they gave him, and they feared that as easily as he welcomed them back into the fold of the country, he could probably just as easily execute them or exile them again. Maybe.
60 conspirators, all senators.
Sorry, I'm going to go back for just 20, a second.
But only 12 are described in enough detail.
I want to hear the number they said. Sorry.
In total, there were 60 conspirators, all senators. We know the names of 20, but only 12 are described in enough detail in the sources for their personal motives to be assumed. 60. Marcus Junius.
There were 60?
At Sheer Mazda, we're excited. Why, you ask? Because we're one of the only dealers in pure...
To be honest, I thought there was like 4. 60, that's a hell of a lot of people. 60 narrowed down to 20, narrowed down to 12 or something like that. That's a lot of people. Wow.
Marcus Junius Brutus had fought with Pompey and was spared after Pharsalus. Welcomed by Caesar, he was appointed governor of Cisalpine Gaul. Brutus's mother was a lover of Caesar, and the two men were close. False but still humiliating rumors circulated that he was Caesar's bastard, and even that his mother had prostituted his half-sister to Caesar. Ancient and modern historians have claimed that they were likely a key motivator for him.
Yeah.
However, Brutus was a supposed descendant of the semi-legendary Brutus who had ousted the last king of Rome, so many insisted that he be the one to take action against Caesar's kingship. He was the conspirator who had the most genuinely idealistic motive to assassinate Caesar. An experienced general with a solid military career, Gaius Cassius Longinus was also forgiven by Caesar in the aftermath of the Battle of Pharsalus. He became a legate in Caesar's army in Egypt, but refused to fight against Pompeians. Nevertheless, he was earmarked by Caesar to be governor of Syria. However, Caesar had hampered his career a few times, preventing him from becoming edile and postponing his consulship. Though he was made legate, Cassius probably deserved a higher command based on his experience. It's apparent that Caesar never really trusted him, and he was right not to. Cassius had plotted to kill Caesar from as early as 47 BC, and genuinely hated Caesar. Certainly motivated in part by his Pompeian loyalties, Cassius disliked Caesar for personal reasons, and was the most active about the plot. Decimus Junius Brutus had fought with Caesar in Gaul, and was one of his most promising subordinates. He was made praetor by Caesar, and was set to be the governor of Cisalpine Gaul after Marcus Brutus's term. Caesar loved Decimus, as shown in Caesar's will that named him as a second-degree heir, a fact unknown to Decimus. This meant that if Octavian had died before, Decimus would have been legally adopted by Caesar and been his heir. His motivation is incredibly difficult to ascertain, the best argument usually coming down to pure greed for power.
Yeah, that one makes no sense. That one makes no sense. Unless he feels like he's some sort of an heir? No. That one makes no sense.
Another veteran of the Gallic Wars, Gaius Trebonius, was one of Caesar's most reliable legates. Caesar had appointed him as urban praetor, then governor of Hispania Ulteria, and finally consul in 45 BC. However, his year as consul was undermined by Caesar, who appointed a replacement consul for Trebonius's colleague, who died just one day before the end of his term, which was considered a mockery of the consulship. Trebonius may well have seen this as an insult, motivating him to join the plot. Previously, he also participated in a failed plot against Caesar, suggesting to Antony that they should murder Caesar. The latter rejected the offer, and the plot had not developed any further. One of Caesar's strongest supporters, Tillius Cimber, was rewarded for his loyalty with the governorship of Bithynia and Pontus. However, he was deeply annoyed that Caesar did not recall his brother, Publius, who was exiled for unknown reasons, possibly leading to his involvement. Publius Servilius Casca was one of the oldest friends of Caesar. Casca appears to have fallen on hard times financially, and may well have been angry that his old friend had not helped him more in this regard. His brother Gaius joined the plot to support Publius. A tribune of the plebs, Pontius Aquila, was publicly mocked by Caesar when he refused to stand during one of Caesar's triumphs. He also had some land confiscated and given to Brutus's mother, Caesar's lover, giving him a deeply personal motivation for joining the plot. Another man who was Caesar's legate in the Gallic Wars, Servius Sulpicius Galba, was a thrifty man. He had guaranteed a loan of Pompey's, and when Pompey's land was confiscated, he inherited the debt. Galba was annoyed and had complained to Caesar, who promptly paid the debt himself. Another debt later emerged from these same circumstances, which Caesar was less willing to help with, much to Galba's outrage. There were also rumors that Caesar may have been sleeping with his wife.
Oh my gosh.
Quintus Ligarius's
He's banging the dude's mom. He's sleeping with that guy's wife. Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of... The picture is being painted, as they would say, and I'm seeing a scumbag. A power-hungry scumbag.
life was spared by Caesar after the Battle of Thapsus, but he was later put on trial for apparently conspiring with Juba of Numidia and threatened with exile. Cicero defended him, and Caesar pardoned him. Nevertheless, he had been deeply depressed at the idea of being exiled. Furthermore, Caesar had executed a relative of his for taking up arms against Caesar despite already having been pardoned. These reasons, and friendship with Brutus, likely brought him into the conspiracy. Another Caesarian legate, Lucius Minucius Basileus, who served in the Gallic Wars, was made praetor in 45 BC, but instead of being given a province afterwards, was given a huge sum of money. This apparently deeply insulted him, motivating him to join the conspirators. The last in the group was Quintus Antistius, who seemed to have joined the plot purely out of devotion to his close friend Brutus. Little to nothing is known of the other 8 named conspirators. In all likelihood, some really did believe that they were ridding Rome of a tyrant, as they would later claim. However, modern historians are also right to suggest that it's equally likely that a good many of them were involved either based on personal grudges or wanting to be a part of the creation of the new order. The sources vary on precisely who was the instigator.
I wouldn't doubt some of them joined in the hopes that, yeah, they're going to be creating something new, but they've elevated themselves up to a position of power. And maybe, just maybe, they can take some of that power away and they can be the leader. Because everyone's, when it comes to power, people screw each other over all the time. People get mad that person has power and would do everything they can to get rid of that person and put themselves in that situation. So, yeah, that's what I think.
But Cassius and Brutus were the ringleaders, the former doing much of the recruiting, with the latter being more of a figurehead, his name and reputation crucial in convincing many others to join. Gradually they convinced the 58 other conspirators to join the plot. The conspirators did consider one of the most influential senators, Cicero, but concluded that he would not commit or would simply slow things down. At first, it was proposed that they kill Caesar, Antony and Lepidus. The latter two were the next most powerful Caesarians, so killing them would effectively remove all the faction's significant leadership. Brutus, however, opposed this. He argued that this was to be a surgical removal of a tyrant, not a widespread political purge. The other conspirators relented. Caesar would soon be leaving on his Parthian campaign, where, surrounded by soldiers, he would be untouchable, so they had to strike while he was in Rome. When Caesar announced a Senate meeting on the Ides of March, just 4 days before he was scheduled to leave, the conspirators decided that this would be the perfect opportunity. Caesar would be separated from his entourage, the conspirators could all be in the same place without raising suspicion, and they were confident that, when the attack began, other senators would quickly come to help them. Gladiators were scheduled to fight in the theatre adjacent to the Senate chamber the day of the meeting, and this would give the conspirators the perfect excuse to have armed soldiers nearby, as Decimus Brutus owned many gladiators. The night before the session, Caesar invited Lepidus and Decimus to his house for dinner. They talked long into the night, and eventually the philosophical question was asked, what is the best way to die? To which Caesar responded without hesitation that a sudden death was best. Throughout the night, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, is said to have had dreams of Caesar's death, and in the morning, when Caesar was making his sacrifices, they were all foreboding. A superstitious man, Caesar decided to cancel the meeting, sending Antony to dismiss the Senate. Caesar had also been drinking late the previous night, and a hangover might have been influencing his decision. When the conspirators heard of this, they sent Decimus to convince Caesar to come to the Senate. Decimus told Caesar that the Senate would be insulted unless he dismissed them in person, and Caesar relented, trusting his friend's judgment. Meanwhile, word of the conspiracy had started to leak. A friend of Caesar's had heard of the plot and didn't know the details. He immediately ran to Caesar's house to warn him, but finding Caesar had already left for the Senate, decided to wait at his house. Another friend would also find out about it that same day and ran to the theatre of Pompey to try and warn Caesar, but would arrive too late. Lastly, as Caesar was making his way to the theatre, someone slipped him a message. Surrounded by crowds of supporters and constantly having messages passed to him, Caesar slipped it into his robes without reading it. Later found on his body, it was a warning of the upcoming assassination. When Caesar arrived at the theatre, Antony, the conspirators and the other senators were all there. The conspirators were acting casual, despite the daggers hidden under their togas, but they were secretly nervous. A man approached Casca and said, "Brutus has told me everything," which shocked Casca, before he realized that the man was referring to his intention to run for Edile. Another senator approached Caesar, talking to him in hushed tones. The conspirators grew anxious, Brutus subtly signaling that they were to kill themselves rather than be captured, before it became clear that the senator had simply been petitioning Caesar on another matter. Despite more bad sacrifices, Caesar was convinced to go ahead with the meeting and entered the chambers. The senators followed, but Antony was quickly pulled aside by Trebonius. Caesar, a veteran with 35 years of experience, was in good shape despite his age. Antony was known as a hedonist, and he was also a veteran of 10 years, strong, quick to anger, and an incredible soldier. Together, the two of them might have been able to fight a way out, so the conspirators had entrusted Trebonius, one of Antony's closest friends, with keeping him out of the way. Caesar was seated at the
Wow.
My name's Mike McCluskey. You know who I am? What did I just walk into? You gotta handle this money.
Can't believe he had a letter on him telling him about the assassination.
Caesar was seated at the front of the Senate, under a statue of Pompey. Cimber approached Caesar, petitioning him to recall his brother from exile. The other conspirators gathered around, encircling Caesar, and suddenly Cimber pulled Caesar's toga down, exposing his shoulder, the signal for the attack. Caesar, who as dictator was protected by law, pushed Cimber back, saying, "This is violence." Casca, Caesar's childhood friend, then attacked the seated Caesar, but missed, only cutting his shoulder. Caesar grabbed Casca's hand, shouting, "Casca, what are you doing?" While Casca simultaneously shouted, "Brother, help me!" Caesar was able to rise and violently throw Casca away from him, but by the time he did, Casca's brother Servilius had attacked, stabbing him in the side. Caesar continued to fight back, but was attacked from all directions, Cassius slashing his face, Vocolianus stabbing him in the back, and Decimus slicing his thigh. Still, Caesar fought back as much as he could. Brutus was the next to approach him, and Caesar sunk down, either due to blood loss or having now lost the will to fight, and Brutus stabbed him in the groin. Caesar pulled his toga over his head to hide his face, just as Pompey had done when he had been betrayed and murdered. Caesar resigned himself to his fate and died in a pool of blood at the base of the statue of Pompey. Suggestions that his last words were either "and you Brutus" or "and you my son" are largely disproven by the ancient sources, most simply saying he groaned in pain. His body had 23 stab wounds, many of which happened after his death when the conspirators had gathered around to stab his body, some even wounding each other. only the 6 mentioned senators stabbed him while he was alive, which means that less than 1% of the Senate had actually taken part in the assassination. Furthermore, the analysis of his corpse at the time determined that only one, the attack from Servilius, was fatal. The fact that they could not strike a fatal blow on an unarmed, already wounded man perhaps tells us something about quite how panicked they were. Out of 60 conspirators, most did not even take part in the stabbing, suggesting that many had joined simply out of political opportunism. Gaius Julius Caesar had been assassinated by men who had either been spared by him or trusted as friends. Dio later wrote of Caesar that if he could have chosen, he probably would have wished he could have died at Munda as a soldier. Even the ancient historians who are critical of Caesar, such as Dio, recognize that such a death was somewhat of a tragic end. For some, Caesar was a warmongering tyrant, driven by a lust for personal glory. To others, Caesar was a leader who tried to fix a system that was clearly broken and was killed before that goal could be reached. Some see Caesar as a combination of both, or something in between. What all can agree on, however, is that Caesar changed the world. By accident or design, his actions ultimately led to the rise of the Roman Empire, and all the effects, good and bad, that would bring. Two of the most interesting things that Caesar has left us today are 2 questions. Did Caesar make the world a better place? And what would have happened if he had survived? We're planning to cover the civil wars in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination in the near future, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting.
Brutus stabbed him in the groin. God damn. Being stabbed like that, that's brutal. I don't understand taking the blanket or towel and putting it over your head. Is it so they can't see the life drain out of you, or because you just don't want to look at them near the end? Just being stabbed to death. God damn. You know, you get shot, that's one thing. It's not going to be fun or pretty. Just being stabbed. Oh. That sucks. I don't really know how I feel about him. He was a brilliant leader, you know, on the military battlefield. I don't think that'll never be taken away from him. I think he had good intentions as a, I don't want to call him a dictator, but as a ruler. He seemed to care. He seemed to be willing to forgive, which is very important. But yeah, he was a fighter. As I said in the one video, would he be able to live in peace? And I don't think he could. It's too bad. If he didn't start those 2 wars, what would have been? I wonder what it would have been like if he would have just focused on the country. But we'll never know. It's the what if. Now, some of you said that after he died, his body was burned. Because I asked if there was a grave or something like that. So if anyone knows, is there a place that's dedicated to him in terms of like what would be a grave? Maybe it's an empty grave or some kind of monument, or not monument. mausoleum? What am I trying to say? Is there a place where they've dedicated that this is where he... Ooh. Is the place he was killed, is that still standing? I mean, I have no idea. That's, you know what, in the end, it's just sad. But I'm going to go ahead and end this here. For some reason, I thought Mark Antony had something to do with his murder. But then when I heard Brutus, I was like, God, yeah, Brutus sounds familiar. But Mark Antony might have been the one who bangs Cleopatra. That's a very crude way of putting it, but, you know, you get what I'm saying. All right, I'm going to end this here. It's 8 o'clock. And I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to relax. Wind down for bed. Been good so far. I'm going to jump back into it, though. Not tonight. Like, subscribe, or I'll stab you. I'm going to come to your house, and I'm going to stab you. And I'm going to stab you in the balls. Or the vagina. I am an equal opportunity murderer. All right? Have a good day. Have a good night.